Hey, everybody's settled in and getting the thumbs up that everybody can hear us okay. So it's my honor as we start off this panel to talk through turning soldiers into software developers, something that's obviously near and dear to the Army Software Factory and Army Futures Command hearts out there. We've got an absolutely star-studded panel here today, and we'll start it off with General Tom Drew, who is the Commanding General of Army Human Resources Command, which oversees the assignments of the entire United States Army. So we're very lucky to have him flying in for this panel. He's also a highly accomplished special operator and Army aviator. We also have Ms. Kate Kelly, the two-star Chief of Human Capital at Army Futures Command, who oversees essentially 28,000 people across the world in her work. And then we've also got Major Tirza Van Dam, who's a reserve officer. Currently a data and AI specialist at Microsoft and the chief recruiter for the Army Software Factory as we got stood up. So no shortage of expertise here on this panel. And without further ado, we're just going to get right into it. And so the first question for General Drew, sir, I think the title of this panel is Turning Soldiers into Software Developers. So the first question is, do we think that this talent exists in the Army, and how do we know?
So I do think, obviously, I was at the software factory today, so I know it exists in the Army, but I do more broadly think that it exists. The struggle that we have in the current version of our personnel system is I really can't see it. You know, I see very, very basic data on every soldier. I see kind of what they do in the Army, and I can see kind of what their rank is. Beyond that, it gets a little bit more opaque. But we can see it a little bit in our system. But coming to the Army is a new, more data-rich environment, the backbone of which is the Integrated Personnel Pay System Army, which is going to have a lot more detail about our soldiers in there. So it will accommodate our ability to search for specific knowledge, skills, and behaviors.
Now, Ms. Kelly, your job, excuse me, Ms. Kelly, your job as the Chief of Human Capital for Army Futures Command is to think about what human capital looks like in the future operating environment. Given what we think about software development sort of eating the world, where do you see Futures Command's role in sort of curating and building this talent?
Thank you. I think it's interesting right now, the way I see my role and the way you just described it. And I would say a little bit different. While I would love to spend all day thinking about that future space, I spend a lot of time right now breaking glass in order to get there. And so I think what's interesting about where we are as an Army today is we've got to fundamentally change not only the way we see skills, to General Drew's point, but what is the path to get us to that future space? And I think what's interesting about things like Army Software Factory and what we're doing here is we are actually illustrating in a tangible way what that future skill could look like. And we're showing for the existing force what they are actually capable of. And it's more perhaps than what we're already capable of today. And from that perspective, I agree completely with what you said. But before we're there is this amazing trajectory of change that as an institution we've got to go through.
That's a great point, ma'am. And I think I'd like to get back to that here in a second. But first, I want to make sure we get to Tirza. Tirza, General Drew just said how right now the Army doesn't really have a great way to see this talent. So we had to go to sort of interviews with soldiers to be able to sort of validate whether or not that talent exists. What did your research find? And if you want to tell the audience about that.
Sure. Thank you, Vito. So it was kind of a journey, just like any, we're not a traditional startup, right? The software factory is not a traditional startup, but it has a lot of similarities where we iterate every time. And with our very first iteration, a lot of the talent was word of mouth, starting with Sergeant Major Crosby, who's the Sergeant Major of Army Futures Command, sent out a note to his fellow Sergeant Majors and just kind of filtered through word of mouth. I came in, I was like employee number 3, if you will, for the software factory. So I came in, developed what our first iteration of selection process was. But the bottom line, to answer your question, is the talent exists in every unit across the Army, regardless of rank or MOS. For those that don't know what that means, that's your career field, if you will, or what you do in the Army. we have everything from a flight medic to a physician's assistant to an infantry soldier to infantry officers that all have this hidden talent throughout the Army that through initially word of mouth, and now we have a more robust system with Miss Kelly's team and General Drew's team to really get the word out to let soldiers know that this opportunity exists, and then we take them through industry best practices of selecting them down through and bringing them into the software factory. And I don't like to give exact numbers because I think it is a deterrent for future prospects coming to the software factory. But I did go to, I am a graduate of Harvard, and I will say that the selection rate for the software factory is on par with the selection rate for Harvard. So it's very competitive. And I just say that because there is this talent everywhere in the Army, and they're, the soldiers really, really want to give back, and they want to serve in a way that they want to serve. So I think that answers your question.
Absolutely. Ma'am, back to you, ma'am. So Tirza just talked about some of the groundwork that she laid as we sort of conceptualize the software factory. And now it's kind of fallen to you to figure out how to affect policy changes and help try to scale this. How has that process gone for you?
It's a daily battle, but one that is quite inspiring, I must say. And it kind of goes to what Tirza is talking about. So we now know that this talent is in the Army, and it's really important to know that narrative was not well known. In fact, the narrative was completely the opposite. The narrative was Army and the federal government, quite frankly, needed to go to the private sector or academia to find this type of talent. And so not only was that wrong, but I think we were also wrong. We underestimated how many people are actually literate already, and then how many people are actually out there. So to Tom's point about awareness of what we have, this is illuminating all sorts of things that we need to do as an Army to kind of step forward in that talent space. And so it has not been without a complete fight to change what has arguably been years of system development and bureaucracy, for lack of a better term, and policies that are not written for a more agile way of managing talent. I mean, historically, the Army manages talent based on what you get defined as when you come in, not necessarily what your ability, aptitude, and future talent can be. And so that's a fundamental cultural mindset shift that we have to make as an organization. And we are one heck of an institution to try to change that mindset, right? So you're talking about not valuing what you were, doctrinally aligned to when you came in, but valuing what that person's ability and potential and future ability could be, and changing that mindset. That's a very significant ground shift that we're going through right now as an Army. So in a very succinct way to answer your question, I would say it has been uphill battle, but it has also been one that is not only worth the fight, it is important and crucial to, quite frankly, our country and our Army, that we continue to push at it and to do what we know intuitively we need to get done.
That's great, ma'am. I don't think there's any disagreement in this room about the importance of this. And so, right along with that, sir, I think the Army is very lucky to have somebody like you, first as the Talent Management Task Force Director and now at HRC, because you really bring an operator's focus and mindset to Ms. Kelly's point, to something that had largely been a legacy process. So as you've now you're sort of new to this role at HRC, you've got a little bit of that background. What have you seen, and what inspires you that we can get this sort of change across the goal line?
Well, first, it's one of those things, being the Talent Management Task Force Director, even though it wasn't that long, I've been doing the talent management thing as long as the Talent Management Task Force with General McGee has been stood up. So I've really focused, I've done a lot of study, along with everybody on the Talent Management Task Force, just brilliant people. But if you look at the future of work, the future operating environment that you guys kind of work on out here at Army Futures Command, if you look at all of those things, and then you look at the industrial age system that we have currently in the Army, because, I see you as a 15 series, which means an aviation, soldier, but it's a code. And if I go beyond that, what helicopter do you fly? What aircraft do you maintain? All those things. We have this industrial age process. That's the only way I see you. I can't see your skills. And to Miss Kelly's point, we have my personal experience is we have really, really talented people in the Army. And when I say the Army, I'm not talking about the active components. So anytime I say Army, please realize that I'm talking about the National Guard, the U.S. Army Reserve, and active component, because that is the Army. We have some just exquisitely talented people. If we knew that, and we get away from seeing them in an industrial age system and see really their knowledge, skills, behaviors, and then let their preferences as the last piece that we're going to collect. What inspires you? What would you like to do? If I knew that, and I knew people had a, computer science degree from West Point or whatever it is, Harvard. I went to night school, by the way. But if I had that data and I ask them, because everywhere I go, I ask people, what do you want to do? If you weren't doing this, what's your real passion? It's interesting the answers I get, but if I had that in the system, I could model and I could see opportunities that I currently can't see. So we just have to kind of see this thing different, have an inventory of what the requirements are in the Army structure for all those things, and then the supply of people to fill those. And one of the things in our study that I found is just about, and a lot of you are from the corporate world, if you have a valued employee, if you're going to spend money to fill a hole in your organization, the thinking in today's world is take valued as employees, upskill them to do that function, because they will still be a valued employee. And in the Army, we have the Army values and all these other things that we are supposed to live up to. If I have somebody that's really talented, and has those values, I can upskill them, which is different. That's a new thing for the Army. Not that, we give people additional training, but normally it's within their field of study. Whatever they do for the military, I'm talking about, this is my passion, just like your software factory. I'm a flight medic and I really have a passion for this. We can upskill you through the training path that you've created here at the software factory and make you world-class because you have a passion. You're really all in. And I think we're learning a lot of lessons in the big Army just from your limited, the stand-up of the software factory. We get to see the value across our formation.
Can I follow up on that?
Please do, ma'am. Yeah.
So two things that really stand out to me on those points. One is that there is a fundamental shift, and I think you would agree, with the Army placing value on an individual contributor's preferences of what they do and where they do it. And historically, that has not necessarily been taken into account in the Army. Typically, the Army tells you what you are and where you're going to go and what you're going to do. So I think it's really exciting right now for what you and HRC are helping the Army see, which is we've got to change that mindset and we've got to take into account people's preferences, because it's about the right person in the right job at the right time, which has to include their interest and aptitude in doing that work. The second piece I think that is really interesting is we are experimenting right now. And I think the software factory allows the Army a venue to figure out what could this look like and what could that future skill look like. And you make a great point that we're not training somebody in an existing field that they have a base of knowledge in necessarily. We are taking people out of arguably a comfort zone and creating a new space for them. So it's a really, really interesting time for what we're trying to achieve.
Thanks, ma'am. Jeff, something you had, Teresa?
Yeah, just to pivot a little bit or add on a little bit. So Software Factory has taken a pretty decent approach to this in my view. And it's selfishly viewed, you guys can be the judge, but we don't just look for the current talent. We look for who is actually going to be the right fit for the role. And there's essentially two different components for that. It's their attitude and their aptitude. And, you can't just have the skill sets, because this is a team sport. We do balanced team, right? You have a PM, you have a designer, and you have software engineers, and that kind of makes up that team. And so the attitude comes in to a great play. And there's like two things that we we really drive home, and it's empathy and it's grit. And without those two skills, we can take anyone that has those two attitude components and build that skill set and upskill them to the appropriate level. You can take somebody that has the skill set without those additional components, and they will not last very long at the software factory or be any good team member across the Army, right? So we're really this talent does exist across the Army, but you can be the best software engineer in the world and not make it into the software factory, because we do a very thorough vetting of that attitude with those skill sets.
Thanks, Teresa. So we're talking about how to turn soldiers into software developers. If you're just tuning in with General Drew, Miss Kelly, and Major Tirza Van Dam, and so I think everybody in their responses just now sort of talked around the idea of research with what industry does, or looking at what academia has told us the future of work looks like. Obviously, we're here at Fed Supernova to sort of sit at the intersection of government, academia, and industry. So I'm curious, and whoever wants to take it in any particular order, what do you think are the best practices from industry and academia that we should be thinking about as we potentially propose a value proposition of turning soldiers into software developers, or changing the way that we're going to think about the future of work for soldiers? Anybody?
Sure, I'll lead. So I think, the software factory has taken a very unique approach with just even the bringing in SMEs, if for lack of a better term, from industry to train up the soldiers. And so they're learning side by side every day, pairing one-on-one through from industry best practices. And the results are pretty astounding, right? It's not getting stuck, they're not going to like their basic training and then never getting trained again, right? In basic training doctrine that was created maybe 10 years ago, or I don't know how often it gets reviewed, right? But it's a while that it gets reviewed. And but by bringing in industry experts, you're learning as industry learns, and so you're keeping those best practices up. And then with academia, I mean, there's a reason that Software Factory chose to house in an academic building, and it's in Austin Community College at the Rio Grande campus. Their tech accelerator that they're doing is right underneath the Software Factory, so there's that synergy from just being in the same place as well. And I'll pause there.
I think what I would add is that there's a realization that in the private sector, especially academia as well, but the private sector has really put their foot well in front of where the Army is from a technology standpoint, from both skill, but also delivering on technology. We all live in a world where, the literacy level of ourselves in our personal lives far exceeds the literacy level of the federal employee or the soldier inside of the government, or inside the Army, meaning we don't operate in the same way. We're actually bifurcated. We are so much better when we're at home with our own tablets and our own families and our own agility on especially technology platforms. And then you step into the Army and you realize that you're operating platforms that are 30 years old and that they have been iterated upon, but they are essentially a 30-year-old platform. And that would never, ever survive in today's environment. And so what we're trying to, I would argue, catch up, and let alone be in front of, but we are absolutely trying to learn from that sector on how we as an Army have got to accelerate our delivery, especially in the technical space, and we've got to accelerate delivery of capability in the hands of the soldier.
Yeah, and so for us, at least in the personnel business, we look to the corporate world to look for best practices, because the Army has about 1 million people in it. So scale in a lot of these things that we read in all the studies and all these books that we've all read, scale does matter. But you can see in there the philosophy behind it. Maybe the application and how you do it may be a little different, but the theory is sound, and it's sound even for a very, very large organization. So we take those things on and we look at how we scale that across. And sometimes it doesn't scale very well, whether it's technology and modernization we're bringing to our equipment, the personnel system, whatever it is. But we get a lot of those ideas from what the corporate world, because you have all these little ecosystems to see what is effective, at least from my perspective, in personnel, human resource management, and then how we see it in the future. So one of the things that we are looking to do is what does the personnel system in 2050 look like? So we've got to figure out what that is. I know it's going to incorporate your software factory and a lot of other skills that we currently don't possess in the Army. But I've got to be able to have seats that I can immediately put them in to gain that capability in the Army rapidly. Because in the current form, it takes forever. By forever, meaning it's latent to the need, especially on the battlefield for all of those that are veterans. You've seen it, where you'll see something commercially off the shelf that's already out there, and yet you in the Army have some clunky something, which is why we have the Army Futures Command. We have to speed that up. So I think by using the corporate world and all these other things in academia that we have done, it kind of points us at least in the general direction of where we need to go. And then we can look at all of what we call small scale things, pilots in the Army, as we try different things in the personnel system. So all the pilots we see across corporate America, you can see these in all these different studies of how that worked, why they worked, sometimes why they didn't work. And then we can apply that to a very, very big organization.
Thanks so much. We're about the halfway point on our panel. I want to encourage everybody in virtual land to feel free to post questions, and we'll try to get them answered as soon as we can. So certainly taking questions from the audience. And as we sort of stand by for that, I have another question, and I'll start with General Drew for this one. And sort of just going back, because you do bring such an amazing amount of operational experience. Here in Austin, at this sort of Fed Supernova type environment, the idea that soldiers need to be software developers is sort of obvious. But what would you say to somebody who sort of says, well, hold on a second, why does the Army really need soldiers to be software developers? How does that translate to you, sir?
Well, if you use your future operating environment, in some cases, a lot of this capability, most of the technology that we use in the military is to help commanders make more informed decisions. And a lot of times out there on the battlefields, they're life and death decisions. So people take those seriously. We want to help commanders. So I think if you're out there disconnected and you need to be able to aggregate and manipulate data, look at data in a different way, if you don't have that resident in your organization forward with you, you don't have that capability. So while you'll hear some people say that, well, we can do that here, we can do that over here, there's a couple people that are in the room that, have seen this work real time on the battlefield. When you have soldiers and the ability to do the things that you guys are doing, you can see it make a difference. It helps commanders. It also helps people on the target. So although I understand the perspective of we probably don't need it down there at the forward edge, I understand why they think that. I don't think it's correct. I've seen it real world work out where that person, that ability to use tech, whether it's software development, all the other skills that we put in some of these elite soldiers, was the difference between life and death and mission success and failure.
Thanks, sir. Ma'am, anything, or Tirza, anything that you'd like to contribute? Why does the Army need software developers?
Well, I don't know if I can beat General Drew on that, but it does go back to the future of warfare in disconnected environments, right? And I think we were talking about this morning, like what happens when the future environment doesn't include contractors, right? And you're out at the edge and you don't have contract support to do it. Who are you going to who can you turn to? Soldiers, right? And DA civilians aren't going to do that. They're not going to be out there in a lot of scenarios. And so it's incumbent upon us to grow this. And you can just look at our near peer competitors and what they're doing, right? And so it would be a disservice, I think, to our country to not do this.
I'll add one point that is maybe a little bit of a departure from the narrative of in a tactical deployed environment, but I will offer this as a real world additional gain for the Army. You know, we're all kind of in a business of hopefully we never actually have to do our job, right? And the bulk of the Army, if we're successful as a nation, is that we never actually are at war. But there's a lot of other days in the year. And the institution of the Army is so huge that in order to be ready and prepared, there is a plethora of software and data problems to solve today, whether you're in that degraded, deployed environment or not. So from my view, and I think the view that we're taking in Army Futures Command, the value proposition is the total spectrum, right? From the top all the way down and from the left all the way right, meaning there is value in teaching this skill and employing this skill across the total force at echelon and no matter what type of work you do. And I think that's what we're seeing in our private lives, that this data and faster decision making and ability to connect people is life today. And you got to believe that that's the reality for the Army as well. I think we've got a question too as well.
Oh, I started a company because I was a soldier that learned how to code, and I coded for the military. Provided some solutions in Iraq, fixing a lot of those old systems that we've been using for years. Now I left the military because I didn't see that track for someone like me. So now I provide solutions to the military through my own means. My question is, how do you keep a soldier from coming to work for me?
You want to attack it?
So I think probably the virtual audience couldn't hear any of that, right? Yeah, so getting a nod. So the question from an audience member, I'm sorry, didn't catch your name at the beginning, was I used to be a soldier in the United States Army that had a real interest in software development, and I didn't see a career path for me, so I got out and I started my own software company. And now, how are you going to make sure that the soldiers that you basically curated at Futures Command don't get out and go work for him or Microsoft or wherever? So with that, who wants to take the first stab at that one? It's basically a question about retention.
Yeah. You want to start?
Sure. Okay. I'll start. So very similar story. I was active duty for a long time. I got out because the Army wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do. They wouldn't let me serve in the way I wanted to serve, much like we just talked about, breaking glass, etc. I think from being a reserve soldier and working in the private sector, I think what drives people to the military in the first place is purpose-driven work, right? It's like it's doing something that is greater than you, making a difference in the world, et cetera, right? And I think that's what's going to keep people in. It's not going to keep everyone in, right? But if money only goes so far, right? If it gives you, like research shows, it gives you a small boost in happiness for a limited amount of time, and then you're rebaselined, right? You go back to the average baseline, and we are going to lose some soldiers, and that's okay because they will have still served in a way that they wanted to serve, and they will continue to go out to the veterans community and help bridge that mil-civ divide that's talked about throughout the world. Yeah, serve in the reserves like me. That takes a special person. But that would be my answer.
I think it's a very simple answer from my perspective, and thank you for your service and for what you're continuing to do for the Army. I think it's showing people like you that we value that skill and that we're going to promote that skill and that we're going to employ you in the way that you actually are able to do that type of work. And I think the Army that you were part of couldn't show you that. And I think that what the software factory and what General Drew is trying to do with the larger system is an experiment in being able to illustrate for people with your skills and your interests that we are going to create those paths and we are going to create those opportunities for you to see yourself as a professional still serving if you choose to. And I would also be remiss if I didn't say that the sheer size and scale of our Army will always necessitate some degree of contracted support across the board. But what we're suggesting is that there is also a very specific niche for our soldiers to do the same. And I think the balance is what we're after.
Yeah. So one of the things, and again, I appreciate your service, and it's a great point. So the retention question, how do we retain it? I think it comes down to the culture, because in the current system, in the current culture, I'm sure when you got out and you said, "Hey, listen, I really want to get out," how many people came up to you and said, "Hey, listen, we value you, are important"? I bet maybe a couple, but the system, the institution didn't do that. Because the institution in the Army right now, which is the current thing, is we do cohort management. So we look at your grade, how long you've been in the Army, whatever that, where we are going is an individual talent management, system. So if I know you have these talents, especially again, as we get to this new data rich environment, I guarantee you that I could find a way to let you do what you're doing right now and continue to serve. So somebody probably didn't come and tell you like, "Hey, listen, we have these positions either in the National Guard or the U.S. Army Reserve that allow you to do some of these things, and you can do this. You can have your software company." But again, it's your ability to transition from active duty to those things, and then it's like, "Hey, listen, I really, I think they need me. I want to go back on active duty." That process is, a 50-year-old process that just gets in its own way. We're trying to solve that so that we identify the institution looks at you as opposed to a huge pile of action figures that do somewhat similar things in this field. So
I don't know if the moderator is allowed to add anything, but what I would say is cohort 1 of the software factory was a great retention tool, because 45% of the soldiers in cohort 1 were going to get out of the Army at the first opportunity. And it provided them a way to stay in and for the Army to retain that talent at least for the next 3 years, which I think we can all agree is more than we would have had without it. So really appreciate that audience question. Again, we're taking questions, virtual land, we're taking questions. And while we wait for any additional questions, I have a question that we're kind of all talking about. And I think we've articulated a clear need for this skill set, and that we've said that the soldiers have been and are out there with the skill set. So why is now the right time to pursue this kind of change?
Best day to plant a tree was 10 years ago or today.
Roger, that's
because honestly, we have had this requirement in the Army for the software factory for years and years. We've all seen it. And if you've served, you've seen it out there. We're having somebody that had this skill out there in these organizations. And like Ms. Kelly said, it's not just out there on the tactical, thing in combat. It's every part of our Army, whether it's, how we train, the training path through the Training and Doctrine Command at Fort Eustis. We don't have an educated force that can see opportunity and sees it to make the Army better, because we've been satisfied with, well, we do these things, we have these branches, we have these, different piles of people. I think this gets beyond it and helps us kind of get to the future.
Well said. Go ahead.
Oh, what about the creatives that you I employ a lot of creatives. A lot of them are veterans, mostly because what I care about. And all of my software developers are also veterans who can serve as software developers or build anything for the military. But where does that talent come from? And is it sitting in the National Guard and the reserves right now?
We've got we've got to get you a microphone. So follow-up question, if you're listening in virtual land, was basically, what about the creatives? It's not just about software development. There's a big creative component here. How are you leveraging the National Guard for that sort of stuff? The people that get employed are those that sort of feel that they have a background in this domain. So, ma'am, I don't know if you want to jump on that.
I'm going to start with this one, but then I'd really be interested in Tears's view on it, because I think one of the more significant lines of effort that we're approaching right now is this intersection with, for example, the reserves and how that existing talent in people's personal lives and private space should be better leveraged in the active component. And I think to General Drew's earlier point about how archaic some of the limiting factors are, we have these unbelievably, and in many cases, legislatively drawn firewalls that do not make permeability an easy thing. So the ability for us to tap into this otherwise almost untapped market of talent that is in our reserves and our National Guard as well, is very hampered by the fact that we don't have simple ways to actually just do it. And so I think if we don't attack that, and we are, but if we don't attack it to success, we are going to stay bifurcated and very limited in the sense that we're not creating that permeable environment that we'd want to be in. Thoughts on that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So to address, just so I don't forget, the creatives and I know a lot of creatives just from my time in the military, right? But the software factory is part of that balanced team that I was talking about. We do have UI UX designers, right? And that's not just a creative, right? That's really, we call it soldier centered design. Most people have heard it as user centered design, but those are really the soldier advocates that really make, going back to the previous conversation of why have soldiers do this. It's really soldiers can really empathize with other soldiers and what they need in garrison and deployed, right? So that's a very unique skill set that if you haven't served, you don't necessarily understand completely. But we are employing creatives, right? They do the design for the applications. They love it. Like if you employ creatives, you know that it's not for everyone, right? So it does take a very unique skill set. So we are building that skill here. Now, how to tap into, going to Miss Kelly's point on how to tap into the reserves and the National Guard. We have been exploring this for a while now. It's desired. I think I get regular inquiries about how to join the software factory as a reservist or as a National Guard person. Even though we haven't figured out some of those, like Miss Kelly said, those legislative boundaries, right? You can only serve on active duty for so long if you're in another component of the military. But some of them apply even though they know that they're not going to get accepted because they're so excited about what we're doing and being able to give back to the Army. But I think it's really, it's going to have to come a little bit of creativeness and a lot of glass breaking and writing new legislation to really break into that talent. And then like the new HR system will help be able to visualize where that talent exists in the other components, in the reserves and the National Guards, but really to really utilize it, it's going to take Congress to make some changes.
Coming up on 5 minutes, so I think we can take one or two more questions from the audience or from virtual land. So as we may, we've got one. Go ahead, shout it out.
Hi, Wayne Shaw, research. I was a squadron commander in the Air Force in Iraq. I had my own truck, and I would often give rides to soldiers I would see walking along the road. And within 60 to 120 seconds of getting into my truck, they would ask me how they could transfer to the Air Force. So I'm wondering if you've thought about how many of your soldier software developers may change colors and go to the Air Force or the Navy, probably the Air Force.
So the question was from an old Air Force officer, former squadron commander, if there's basically the opportunity to transfer from services, so into and out of the Army towards or out of the Air Force. Are we thinking about that yet? I think I know the answer, but
A couple of things that I would just offer. Number one, we actually learned a lot from the Air Force and from many other entities across the DoD on how to stand up and structure the Army software factory. And what we tried to learn from those prior experiments and then inculcate into our approach now has been tremendous. And so I think you're right that there's interest and aptitude, especially with what the Air Force is doing. Unfortunately, I get to be the person who has to bring up legislation all the time. And there is unbelievable bureaucratic limitations to how people can make those changes, regardless of intent and goodness and make sense. And I couldn't even begin to tell you the history of how we got so compartmentalized as a department, but we are there, as you clearly understand. I think our hope and our approach, and certainly I can speak for AFC, would be to help people like General Drew and the Army continue to champion to break down those barriers. Because, I mean, one thing that AFC is very, very vocal about is that future force and that future fight is not going to be by one single service ever, right? So we have to be doing things in a way that makes us a joint force. And little things like not making it so difficult for somebody to change services because they want to is steps in that right direction, in addition to the multitude of complexities surrounding interoperability, networking, data. But I think it's something that we've got to get after. And I think, unfortunately, we've just got some ties around us right now that we've got to continue to try to break.
Well, first thing, I just want to say it's good to see you again. I appreciate that ride. But you're right. So really, from the SecDef and the executive branch, that they've got to make some decisions here, because again, everybody is parochial, not because they're bad people or they don't see it correctly. It's they have been given their own mission and they're trying to fill it. So when we have soldiers that want to go to other services, that comes to me for the final vote. So I guess there's been a sea change. I've had 164 requests to transfer from the Army to the Space Force, because that's another service that we've got to stand up. I can only think of one case that I have recommended disapproval up to the secretary for this inter-service transfer, because I think in the future, we can't see ourselves as I'm in the Army, I'm in the Air Force, Marine, Navy, Space Force, you pick it, right? Because it's way too important. In a time of scarcity, you've got to be a very, very good team player. And if I have a capability that the Air Force needs, Space Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, I have got to look at the overall big picture and make the best decision I can. And it can't be, well, if I give this capability to the Air Force, I'm not going to have it. We don't have time for that anymore. As you go to the future and you play out some of the budget restraints that we're going to have and the environment, I think we got to be a little bit more open to that, and the gaining force gets the ultimate vote and not the losing force.
Let me just add one thing, because I'm reminded of something that I tell my organization a lot, separately from a specific software or data environment. But I really believe this. High-performing organizations import talent as much as they export it, right? If you are only a one-way street, you are not as good as you can be. And if you are exporting talent, that means you have amazing people on your team that other people want. It also means you have an opportunity to get an amazing person in. Not a lot of people have the mental view and agree with me on that, but I very much agree, I believe it. And so I think as a department, and quite frankly, for all of us, whether you are in academia or in the federal space or running your own company, if you are not thinking that way, you are missing out, right? Because you got to know the world is changing around all of us. People are less inclined for the 40-year gold watch career. You've got to be prepared to import it and export it. And you're going to be better off if you believe that and you embrace it.
We are about at time. I want to give our panelists one last chance to say anything they didn't get a chance to say. So just real quick lightning round. Here's anything?
For the reservist that had the question, the blockchain reservist, just shoot me a note to my .mil.
Nice. I just really appreciate being here. I appreciate the questions and your attention. It's always exciting for me to be able to speak to audiences like this and get feedback from you all on what's not only of interest to you, but what are some of the challenges that you've encountered, and the questions that you offer really help inspire me in directions that we need to go. So we're very excited about what the Software Factory has been able to do thus far. We have much more work ahead, unfortunately, but that's kind of what keeps me up and fired up. So.
Again, thanks for the opportunity to come here. We learn, the Army and me personally, I learned from all these examples to get out of these old habits. Diversity of thought, I think, is a big thing because, all of us kind of grow up, for those that were in the Army, you kind of see it one way. And if you've been in a long time, you see it the exact same way. And that's not a good thing as you move to the future. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. One more time, General Tom Drew from Human Resources Command, Ms. Kay Kelly from Army Future Command Headquarters, Tiers of Van Dam, Reserve Officer N from Microsoft. Thank you so much for flying in and for being a part of this. This was fantastic. Thanks, everybody.